You have thought wrong if you think Bridgerton is all about gorgeous gowns, steamy scenes, and finding true love at a ball. Because what the show doesn't tell you up front is that everything these women learn their entire lives is designed for one goal: landing a husband. But here's the twisted part. All that training becomes almost useless the second they say, "I do." And what happens after marriage is where things get absolutely wild in ways the show only hints at. From the moment a girl in the Bridgerton world can hold a paintbrush, she's being molded into the perfect marriage prospect. But it's not about making her happy or preparing her for an actual partnership. It's about making her marketable. And the skills they force these women to master are so specific and so calculated that when you break them down, you realize just how brutal the marriage market really was. Starting with the most obvious one, the accomplishments. Every single young lady had to master what they called feminine accomplishments, and this wasn't optional. We're talking piano or harpsichord playing, which was essential. If a lady couldn't sit at a piano during a social gathering and perform flawlessly, she was already losing points with potential suitors. Then there's singing, because a woman with a pleasant voice was considered refined and well-bred. They also learned drawing and painting, usually in watercolor, because these skills demonstrate patience and a delicate sensibility. And languages aren't left out too, as French was non-negotiable and Italian was a bonus. These weren't just hobbies, they were requirements. But here's where it gets interesting. None of these skills actually helped you run a household or survive a marriage. They were purely for display. The entire point was to demonstrate these accomplishments at balls, dinners, and social gatherings, so men and their families could evaluate the ladies as products educated enough to marry into wealth. It was a performance, and every girl knew it. Penelope Featherington actually understood this game better than anyone, which is why she turned her observational skills into Lady Whistledown. She couldn't compete with Daphne's popularity or Francesca's musical talent, so she weaponized the one thing she was genuinely good at: reading social situations and writing. However, the accomplishments were just the beginning, because what really mattered was etiquette, and the rules around this were absolutely insane. A young woman knew not to be alone with a man, ever, not even for 5 minutes. Chaperones had to be present at all times when unmarried women were around eligible men, because even the suggestion of impropriety could destroy a girl's reputation forever. And we're not talking about an actual scandal here, just being seen alone with a man could ruin them. Also, they couldn't use first names until they were engaged. Imagine spending months falling in love with someone and having to call them Mr. Bridgerton the entire time, like we see Sophie struggle with. The formality was suffocating, but it was designed to keep emotional distance until a financial and social arrangement was locked in, because that's what marriage was: a business transaction dressed up as romance. The social events were where all this training came together. Balls weren't parties, but battlegrounds. Other families were judging every dance, every conversation, every outfit choice. A lady had to know exactly how to walk into a room, hold a fan, curtsy to people of different ranks, and make conversation without being too bold or too boring. One wrong move and they'd be labeled as unmarriageable. Rosamund Lee in season 4 is the perfect example of this traditional path. She's doing everything right, showing up at every social event, dressing impeccably, demonstrating poise, following her mother's instructions to the letter. She's been trained like an athlete for the marriage market, and her younger sister, Posey, shows us what happens when a girl is not quite polished enough or just different, which comes with awkwardness, social slips, and the anxiety of knowing they are constantly being evaluated. Interestingly enough, even younger girls like Hyacinth Bridgerton are already being trained. In season 4, there's a moment where she's learning the specific placement of spoons at a dinner table, which sounds ridiculous until you realize that knowing proper table etiquette could make or break a marriage prospect. Every tiny detail mattered. But then there's Eloise Bridgerton, who refuses all of it. She won't perform the accomplishments, she won't play the game. She reads books that actually challenge her, rather than make her look refined. And in the Regency era, this was borderline scandalous. Women were expected to pursue accomplishments rather than intellectual depth. Eloise, wanting to learn for the sake of learning, not for the sake of landing a husband, made her a social problem. Funnily enough, the courtship rules were even more restrictive than the training itself. A man had to ask the woman's father for permission before he could even consider pursuing her seriously. Then the courtship could last years, and during that entire time, the couple couldn't be alone together. They'd exchange letters and symbolic gifts like locks of hair or books, but only once engagement seemed likely. The whole process was public, supervised, and intensely strategic. Families were aligning wealth and status, not just matchmaking personalities. And this is where the show gets really clever, because what they don't tell you in the first season, what they only start showing you through characters like Francesca and Penelope, is that all this training is for the wrong job entirely. Here's the thing that makes this whole system so twisted. Every single accomplishment these women spent years mastering becomes almost irrelevant the moment they get married, because what a married woman actually needs to do is run an entire household, and nobody trained her for that. The second a woman married, her entire role shifted from display to management. She had to oversee budgets, manage servants, procure provisions, host elaborate social events, coordinate family logistics, raise and educate children, and contribute to charitable works. These weren't small responsibilities, they were full-time jobs that required skills in finance, leadership, diplomacy, and crisis management. And none of that was part of debutante training. Francesca Bridgerton's arc after marrying John Sterling shows this reality. She goes from being a daughter in the Bridgerton household to being a countess who has to manage an estate, staff, social obligations, and her own household. The accomplishments she learned as a girl barely come up. What matters now is whether she can actually run a household and maintain her family's social standing. But what's even more dramatic is what nobody tells these girls until it's too late. Legally, they stop existing the second they marry. This is the part that will genuinely shock you. Under a legal doctrine called coverture, which was real and enforced throughout the Regency era, a married woman's legal identity was completely absorbed by her husband. She couldn't own property, she couldn't control her own money, she couldn't sign contracts, she couldn't even claim legal rights to her own children. Everything she had, her inheritance, her belongings, her future, belonged to her husband the moment she said, "I do." So all those years of training to be the perfect bride, all those accomplishments to attract a wealthy husband, all that careful social positioning, it was all leading to a moment where they legally ceased to exist as an independent person. If he decided to gamble away the woman's dowry, she had no recourse. If he was cruel or unfaithful, they had almost no legal options. Marriage granted women social legitimacy and financial security, but the cost was their legal personhood. And the craziest part, the social training actually prepared women to accept this. The etiquette, the chaperones, the restrictions on independence, the emphasis on obedience and social grace, it was all conditioning them to become dependent on male authority. By the time they married, they'd spent their entire lives being told their value came from pleasing others and following rules. Penelope's power move as Lady Whistledown makes so much more sense when you understand this context. She created an income stream and a source of influence that existed outside of marriage, outside of male control. Even after marrying Colin, she had something that was hers. That's why revealing her identity was so dangerous. It proved she'd been operating with autonomy and power in a system designed to strip women of both. Sophie Beck's storyline in season 4 flips this entire system on its head. She's a maid who wasn't groomed for the marriage market at all. She has no accomplishments, no social training, and no access to elite society. By Regency standards, she shouldn't even be in the same room as someone like Benedict Bridgerton, let alone be considered marriageable, but her authenticity and resourcefulness, the skills she developed just surviving, make her more compelling than any debutante who spent years learning to play piano. However, the show doesn't sugarcoat how rare Sophie's situation would have been. In real Regency society, a maid marrying an aristocrat would have been scandalous to the point of social suicide. The class boundaries were rigid, and crossing them had consequences. Sophie's storyline works in Bridgerton because the show has always played with historical accuracy, but it also highlights just how trapped most women were by their social position. The reputation destruction machine made everything even more precarious. One wrong move and a lady could be labeled unmarriageable. Lady Whistledown's gossip column shows how quickly a reputation can be built or destroyed. And without a good reputation, a woman had almost no marriage prospects, which meant almost no future security. This is why the chaperone rules were so strict. It wasn't really about propriety, it was about protecting a commodity. A woman's virginity and reputation were her only tangible assets in the marriage market, and if either was damaged, her value plummeted. The entire social system was built around controlling women's behavior to maintain their marketability. What makes Bridgerton so fascinating is how different characters navigate this brutal system. Daphne plays the game perfectly in season 1, yet she still faces reality in her marriage. Penelope subverts the system by creating her own power structure. Eloise rejects it entirely. Francesca tries to do everything right and discovers marriage is far more complicated than the training suggested. Each path shows different costs and different strategies for survival. The show also reveals how this system hurts men too, just differently. They had more freedom and legal power, sure, but they were also pressured into marriages based on duty, bloodlines, and financial strategy rather than genuine connection. Anthony's entire season 2 arc is about him trying to make a sensible match and nearly destroying his chance at actual happiness. The system was rigid for everyone, even if the consequences fell hardest on women. But here's what the show keeps coming back to. The women who succeeded weren't the ones who followed all the rules perfectly. They were the ones who figured out how to use the system's rules to create space for themselves. Penelope used social observation to build power. Francesca used her musical talent to find a genuine connection. Even Daphne, who seemed to do everything right, only found happiness when she stopped performing and started demanding honesty. The Regency marriage market wasn't designed to create happy marriages or fulfilled people. It was designed to maintain class structures, consolidate wealth, and control women's independence. The accomplishments, the etiquette, the social rituals, they were all tools to prepare women for a life where their primary value was decorative and reproductive, where their legal existence was erased, and where their survival depended entirely on attracting and pleasing a husband.